honor and a pleasure to have Carol Muske-Dukes and Cecilia Woloch read their poetry for us today. They are both wonderful poets. Carol will read first, and then Cecilia. I will say a few words about Carol, and then she will read. Carol Muske-Dukes is the author of 9 books of poems, 4 novels, and 2 essay collections, as well as having edited poetry anthologies. Her most recent book of poems, Blue Rose, Penguin Poets, was a 2018 Pulitzer Prize finalist. She is professor of English/creative writing at USC, where she founded the Creative Writing Literature PhD program. Her books have been finalists for the National Book Award and the LA Times Book Prize, as well as New York Times Most Notable Books. She is former California Poet Laureate and former poetry columnist for the LA Times. She has received Guggenheim, NEA, Library of Congress Awards, Pushcart, and Castagnola Awards. When I read one of Carol's poems, I see the image presented, follow the turns, surprises, discoveries, and see the whole at its completion. Her poems are told in such a new way, with a superlative use of language, and with an eloquence and a sensuousness. All this captivates me in a way that I can only say is breathtaking. I sit back with the poem enrapturing me inside and out. One of the main themes in Carol's poetry is family. The poems for her mother, who read and recited poems to her when she was young, her poems for her late husband, actor David Dukes, her poems for her daughter Annie, all are warm, loving, and tender. They have moved me deeply. Carol is a luminous poet. Here's Carol Muske-Dukes.
Thank you. That was a glorious introduction. I'd like to thank you, Harry, and also Jennifer. Thank you for arranging this event today. And I don't know, it's so weird to think of an audience. I'm assuming somewhere out there is an audience on your channel 22.
But we have, if I may just interject, this goes to the TV screens of the 227 residents who, as you know, are either worked in front of or behind the camera, TV movies, and then the staff. So they're out there. It's like the comedian said, "I know you're out there. I can hear you breathing."
Yeah, exactly. I want to hear you laughing, but I hear you breathing, or God help us, something else. This is a very surreal time, so I'm glad that everybody's safe and well so far, and we're all surviving this very peculiar shelter-in-place time. As Harry mentioned, I'm a poet and a professor, and my late husband was indeed an actor. I assume that some of the audience will remember him. He was obviously Emmy and Tony nominated, a regular Broadway and screen presence, and he died suddenly of a heart attack in 2000. But again, he's remembered by many, and so it seemed only fit, given the audience and their professional backgrounds, to read today a few poems from a collection of mine called Sparrow, which was published by Random House in 2003. And it contains primarily elegies for David, my late husband, or as I like to call them, meditations on our twin arts, his of acting and mine of poetry, and of course his loss. Sparrow, besides being, as Harry mentioned, a National Book Award finalist, it has become a kind of recitation favorite of children as part of a National Endowment for the Arts program called Poetry Out Loud. And they somehow or other, this poem of mine written for David about acting has become a favorite of theirs. And it's so gratifying to hear it read in the young voices of children. I can't read it or recite it anywhere near as well as they seem to, but here it is. It's called Ovation. I try to make myself afraid the way you must have been afraid, stepping out onto this stage, but with a fear so pure, so perfectly informed that you strode out shouting. Here where the neon yellow arrows painted on the floor shoot forward underfoot in blackness, beneath the hanging sequence of tinted skies, out toward that mindless, immortalizing light, now dark. Now I think I feel the heat you must have felt, rising from the front rows, a gaping fire door, a furnace, your single body standing here with no shadow, swinging on itself. Had you been a fool, you might have thought that they loved you. They never love you, you said. They are hungry for the god in his gold eclipse, the pure you on fire. John and I move quickly, each with a handful of ash scattering. The sound of no sound falling into the cracks in the boards, the footlights, the first row. A small personal snow, a prince of dust, a villain of dust. Each part you played drifting up again, recomposing. I open my hand, I let you go, back into the lines you learned, back into the body and the body's beauty, back into the standing ovation, bow after bow after bow. So continuing with, I guess what you would call a theme here of acting in these poems, meditations. This is called The Illusion. After his death, I kept an illusion before me that I would find the key to him, the answer, in the words of a play that he'd put to heart years earlier. I'd find the secret place in him, retracing lines he'd learned, tracking his prints in snow. I'd discover, scrawled in the margin of a script, a stage note that would clarify consciousness in a single gesture. Not only the playwright's imagery, but his the actors and his the selves. Past thought's proscenium, the slight tilt of Alceste's head or his too ironic bow. The long pause as Henry Carr adjusts his straw boater. Salieri slumps at the keyboard. Hotspur sinks into self-reflection, where the actor disappears into physical inspiration. Thought rises a silent aria. Thought glitters in the infinite prism of representation. For love unrequited and tactical hate, the shouted curse of a wretched son, a vengeful duke, in that silent prescient dialogue unspoken, he'd show up in the ear, in a tone blue and sweetened as wood smoke, show up in these directions to the flesh, cues like green shouts, the blood swimming with indicatives. Look, the same smile he flashed at me from the shaving mirror is here, right here, but realized. I remember this path opening in a deep forest outside Athens, the moon shuddering into place, and no players as yet at hand. And sorry for the rattling noises. This is called, significantly, Actor. You give me up, you go away. You walk on a stage and are remade. I long for you, but you have a strophic relationship to longing. You move so gracefully between what the author intended, what the audience requires. Perfect messenger, you want nothing. You never wanted more than that enunciatory light on your face, the words learned by heart, so that the body could make every human intention inviolable. All is revelation in that world. How could I have ever competed with such implacable possession of gesture? When you crossed under the arc of the proscenium, you were already dead to me, yet more alive than ever. You turned back once to look at me over your shoulder, opening the stage door, not yet made up, but already a stranger, the hawk staring out of your face. I like to think of this as a lighthearted actorly poem. David said to me at one point, he was trained as a Shakespearean actor, and he was telling me at one point about how actors hated to play Romeo. And I guess not just for some reason, I mean, maybe because it's an obviously over romanticized part, but he said that actors would sit around and kind of trash Romeo at times. So this is a kind of riff on that idea of poor Romeo. And there's a reference to Richard Crookback, and you know what that's, of course, too, in Shakespeare. Romeo. Romeo is a wanker, you say. And the other actors lift their glasses, recalling grunting battles with Capulets fought in battery-lit codpieces. Somebody, cast as Richard Crookback, recounts popping his air-filled hump, it shriveling like a balloon on his back. Nobody ever wants to sing "Try to Remember the Kind of September" again. Slick cads, kings, Hollywood whores, psychos, all shot by the messenger. The actors brandish their glasses. What brushes against the glass mouths is wind, slamming shut the skylight, the lit trapdoor above their leads to heaven, resembling a parenthesis between identities where players wait to be cast. Come night, come Romeo, come loving, black-browed night. This is the space between stellae. Take him and cut him out in little stars so that all the world will be in love with sweet audition. The glasses float again, catching the great light, the friar's lifted filter of fire, Juliet's eyes. Their voices rise in hectoring chorus in the dreamy interlude before the coming acts. Oh, Romeo, wanker, Romeo. Thank you for laughing. I always think of that as funny, maybe only to actors, but thank you for laughing as an actor and a poet. And this is called, this is a little harder to read. I'll do my best with it. A poem about actors again, and about David, and I'm sure other actors have this predilection to leave notes around to himself about scripts, and also he would also tear up scripts that he wasn't. It was either old scripts or scripts he didn't like and wasn't going to use. Play scripts, telescripts, movie scripts, and then he would put them in a stack so we could write phone messages on them, because he was, I don't know, he was never frugal, so it was just some crazy habit of his. So you would suddenly, you'd be writing a phone message and then you'd flip it over and see some of the text from a script. That's what this is about, and other things. It's called A Private Matter. You, never you, the new vessel, dark light of the sprung soul, flung upward or shuttered upringing, iridescent as a fountain, eyes flickering wide open in sleep. And on the kitchen sideboard, backs of script pages cut up by you to memo size. If someone jots a note, turns it over, there are the words, dialogue of people you once became, or not. Laura says she cannot command the space station alone any longer. Can't he see this? Brent says he knows. He knows what she has been going through. I don't know what these words are for, just as I know you will arrive no more to counter this argument. You may have said these things aloud. You walked, you lay once beside me. Albert says suddenly, from a paper square, vague, cryptic, enigmatic, ambiguous. Claude says, how do you mean? I want to enter every semblance of you, profile, ideogram, rain light, zigzag kite, shifting plinth, even this comment from Mohammed. I should be going. This is a private matter. Earlier, Frida has said, you're upsetting me, Ira. Let me consider this private matter in anger, in terror, in reverence. Voiceless, let me consider a thumbprint, a top sheet, margin shout. Here's Mark crying, bullshit. How can a man live in any other time but his own? At the tombstone, the fire pit, at the anchor dragged, brain red over consciousness, Ivan says, I don't see why I have to put up with your tantrums. In this private matter, I refuse the lilac, the anemone, all the lit, banked candles. Rachel says he's in the middle of nowhere, without an alibi. Bring me no alibi. Bring me instead one sprig, pale white, of your never-endlessness, one pulse leap inside the sick, brilliant rose of your not being. Holden says, that's my girl. Fire rose, ash, drawn petaled, unpetaled along my wall of solitude. You hover eyelid at falconhide and surge cries, read Seneca. Laura is alone in the space station, weeping. I am not weeping. I am emptying the pockets of my own monologues. I am listening to the semblances, what you were, who you've been. You're disastrously open-minded, a fragment says, it seems to me, though I ask for no feedback here in my space station, here in my former life where there is no gravity, or this crushing gravity, in my kitchen, my open mind, where I listen closely to no connections. To you, David, know you. Let's see. I'm going to move on quickly here and read from my most recent book, which is called Blue Rose. But even though it's mainly, again, a collection focused on, in this case, often focused on my daughter, who is, in a sense, the Blue Rose. This is a poem, again, about acting, sort of. It's keeping with the theme, but I'll share an embarrassing secret of mine, which is that I was in the Paris production of the rock musical Hair 100 years ago, totally by chance, as I have no talent for acting or dancing, although I can sing a bit. So I walked into this audition and the theater district in Paris and ended up on stage. But I think everything else is pretty clear here. There's a reference, a little bit of French, which if you speak French, you know the phrase va-t'en, which means get lost, less formal than allez-vous-en, and that is part of the poem's focus here at one point. I think everything else is pretty clear. Audition. Once, through an ancient stage door, past a sign, L'audition, I'm ushered by hip Mercury, cocked torch lighting his winged brow. My number's the one he hands me, though I don't know how to act or if I can belt easy to be hard, which I do. How can people be so heartless? I asked the high notes. The day before, I'd quoted de Beauvoir with equal fire as a metro creep touched my leg, crooning flat. I shouted my textbook va-t'en, which he instantly corrected. My error, wrong person familiar. Now an anonymous voice from a dark row asking for one more number. Later a callback at my Cité U dorm. Suddenly on stage, piping high notes at a Hell's Angel, missing back of chorus cues half rehearsed, the first bars of Aquarius chime, and I climb hand over hand from scaffolding below the side balconies into scripted light. But the tribe didn't take to me. The only time I took my clothes off at the nude scene, Act One's end, they hid my tie-dyed jeans. I couldn't be naked the way they were. I think everything is real. Nude all interlude, I searched behind the great moth-eaten sway of cloth, beneath hanging skies, in my forever auditioning blonde body, begging in each failed language my clothes. Pourquoi, mes amis? Funny joke, but these bright fake tryouts at life I'm going take a toll. Due to be paid up Mercury's road. Everything was real to me, even the ongoing joke war over a woman's body. What I shout back exiting is how I believe it will all come down in a future where she, great moon, rises up, floods the seventh house, and Jupiter aligns peacefully at last with his partner, Mars. So I'll read one last poem. This is a very new poem called Koan, and I know you all know that a koan is a kind of a Zen riddle posed by a master, a Zen master, to a student, from which I take the title. And this particular poem will be published online on June 9th as part of a poetry anthology called, with a long title, Together in Sudden Strangeness, America's Poets Respond to the Pandemic. And the anthology will then be published as a hardcover book by Knopf in September. So I hate when I teach creative writing, I tell my students not to say this really happened, but this sort of happened. Koan. A breeze bends the candle flames. The child sitting across from me asks, "Why does everybody die?" All around us, up and down the laden table, grown-ups turn back to their drinks. I look up at the one sky, the one sea, another strobe gold sun gone under. Still, her solemn gaze at me through a blood-red Shirley temple. Somewhere, she says, there are tigers. Far away or right here, sunstripes flit across the tablecloth. Far away, a wise master intones. You climb alone up the steep rock face, hand over hand, pulling up your weight. But the tiger appears above you, teeth bared at the top. She laughs. She loves everyone she's told to love. Even a cliff top where death looms is funny. Even a doomed climber without time for a master's snap. What does the climber fail to see? That red flower blooming in the rock to the side. Look to beauty. None of this is meant to make sense, but sense will inspire the tiger whose cubs are starving, or this child refusing to eat. For beauty, red flower on the side, gulls overhead, each laughing cry a koan. She taps her Miss Temple glass. You look all sideways when I see through this, but look again, a lone surfer still out there shooting sideways. Now someone stands, drunk, points to a swaying bright mountain on the horizon. Tsunami, he shouts, and keeps shouting. The great wave dances side to side.
That was wonderful, Carol.
Thank you, guys.
To use one of your phrases that you used in one of your poems to David, who's a magnificent actor, you are, as a poet, the perfect messenger, and also as a poet. So thank you for reading your poetry. It was a genuine pleasure, and you're just such a brilliant poet. So thank you very much, Carol.
Thank you for not shooting the messenger. Just kidding. I love reading the messenger.
We honor the messenger. Thank you, Carol. Our next poet, Cecilia Woloch. One thing that both of you have in common, at least in terms of Harry, is that in 1986, I was doing a poetry reading series on Melrose called Poetry on Melrose at Gasoline Alley. And I asked Carol Muske at that time, on the cover of her book Windmere, and then at another time Cecilia to read. And I remember both of those readings vividly, and I followed both of your work in your books and in your publications ever since that time. So this is a genuine, if I may be redundant and use that word again, pleasure and honor for me. Cecilia Woloch, born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is the author of a novel and 6 award-winning collections of poems. Her book-length poem, Tsigan, the gypsy poem, forgive me if I didn't pronounce it right, Cecilia, Cahuenga Press, 2002, has been the basis for multilingual, multimedia performances in Los Angeles, Warsaw, Paris, Athens. A poem from Tsigan, second edition, True Sylvia's Press, 2018, is featured in the Daniel Libeskind exhibit at Auschwitz-Birkenau. In addition to teaching at colleges and universities, Cecilia has conducted writing workshops in schools and communities across the U.S. and in Europe. Her honors include a Pushcart Prize, Fulbright Fellowship, fellowships from NEA and CAC. Her work has been, the last is California Arts Council. Her work has been published in translation in French, German, Polish, Bulgarian, Hungarian, Ukrainian, and Romanos. She collaborates regularly with musicians, dancers, visual artists, theater artists, and filmmakers. Cecilia Woloch's poetry is lean, lyrical, new, and compassionate. There's a sensuality and sagacity in it, and always the fire, the dance, and the shadows. Her themes include love and loss, family, tribe, exile, movement, survival. If I could touch a single word, I'd set it flaming in his hand, Cecilia wrote, and that's what she has done. Set her poems on fire in the reader's hand. Cecilia has astonished me for years with her brilliant poetry. Here's Cecilia Woloch.
Well, thank you, Harry. What a beautiful introduction. I never feel like I can live up to that. And thank you again, Carol. I never get tired of you hearing read those poems from Sparrow. I just love that book so much. But you didn't read Love Comes Hungry to Anyone's Hand, so you owe me that one. I was thinking of reading
that, but I was running a little long in time. But
okay.
Thank you for remembering it.
I would listen forever. Thank you. It's an honor to read after Carol, whose work I have admired and loved for so very long. I'm going to read poems from a couple of different collections, and mostly I'm reading poems about family. And the first one is for my parents before I was born, and it's called Tangible Sweetness. Oh God, she's beautiful. It's New Year's Eve. The dress is pink. She's 21 years old. She hasn't seen me yet. She may not even know I'll come. A sour daughter, sickly, difficult, begging her to save that dress. And here I am, gone past it, already older than she was the night she wore it. And right there, in her body, crying with her on the steps. What's terrible is I know why she's crying, and I can't explain it either. On the periphery, my father smokes a cigarette, laughs, worries. Through space and time, we touch in this thin moment, make a pact to break jaggedly in three, to live by chance. There's even music, and it's music I will love, an orchestra in black and white, a dance that haunts my body. Mother, for the pink dress, for each thing that never was. Father, a toast. Gather that woman in your arms. Begin my life. It's 1956. This is a waltz. For some reason, my parents' favorite song was the Tennessee Waltz, which is actually a very sad song, but very beautiful. So probably one thing to always keep in mind about me is that I'm one of 7 children. And I think my parents would have just kept having children forever because they were really in love with babies. And when I was growing up and wanted to know where babies came from, I don't think I ever asked outright. And my mother said much later that she and my father were told that they should tell their children about sex, but she said nobody told us what to tell you. So they didn't tell us anything. So I figured it out on my own. And again, as Carol said, it doesn't make it a poem, but this really did happen. And it's gratifying that all my brothers and sisters, when they read this poem, said, oh yeah, we remember that too. So the title of the poem is Why I Believed as a Child that People Had Sex in Bathrooms. Because they loved one another, I guessed. Because they had 7 kids and there wasn't a door in that house that was ever locked except for the bathroom door. That door with the devil's face, 2 horns like flame flaring up in the grain of the wood. Or did we only imagine that shape? Which meant the devil could watch you pee. The devil could see you naked, because that's where people took off their clothes and you had to undress for sex, I'd heard, whatever sex was. Lots of kissing and other stuff I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Because at night, when I was scared, I just climbed into my parents' bed. Sometimes other kids were there too, and we slept in a tangle of sheets and bodies, breath. A full ashtray on the nightstand, our father's work clothes hung over a chair, our mother's damp cotton nightgown twisted around her legs. Because when I heard babies were made from sex, and sex was something that happened in bed, I thought, no, the babies are already there, in the bed. And more babies came. Because the only door that was ever locked was the bathroom door. Those 2 inside, in the steam of his bath, her hairsprays mist. Because sometimes I knocked and was let in, and my father lay in the tub, his whole dark body underwater like some beautiful statue I'd seen. And my mother stood at the mirror fixing her hair, or she'd put down the lid of the toilet and perched there, talking to him. Because maybe this was their refuge from us, though they never tried to keep us away. Because my mother told me once that every time they came home from the hospital with a brand new baby, they laughed and fell in love all over again and couldn't wait to start making more. Should this have confused me? It did not. Because I saw how he kissed the back of her neck and pulled her, giggling, into his lap, how she tucked her chin and looked up at him through her eyelashes, smiling, sly. So I reasoned whatever sex they had in the bathroom, those steamy hours when we heard them singing to one another, then whispering, and the door stayed locked. Because I can still picture them languid there, and beautiful and young, though I had no idea how young they were. My mother soaping my father's back, her dark hair slipping out of its pins. Because what was sex after that? I didn't know he would ever die, this God in a body, strong as God. Or that she would one day hang her head over the bathroom sink to weep. I was a child, only one of their children. Love was clean. Babies came from singing. The devil was wood and had no eyes. I'm going to read a little prose poem from this little chapbook called Earth. The prose poem is called What Was Promised Me? Nothing. A ring and some salt, rice in the white shoes, music, a doll. The book my mother read to me over and over when I was a child. Tigers turning to butter, to milk. An amulet from a boy who carried a knife in his pocket, too. Night. I was not promised dawn. Stars hooked to sky by my father's hands. Love like a tree I could climb to the top of and then jump down from, or swing from, or fly. Mercies so small I could hide each one inside a flower. Sharp white teeth. A clock made of pearls, each pearl an hour, and the hours numberless. A pink dress that disappeared. Where did it go? And the tiny ballerina spinning and spinning inside a dome, a door that would open and close. no house, no home but the story I've lived toward. Luck running out like a shimmer of wind, 2 buckets full of cold water, wood for a fire, and flame.
Beautiful.
I've written a lot about my father's family, particularly about his mother. And I suppose I've written a lot about that because I know so little. Because that side of the family was quite secretive and mysterious and a little dark. It took me a long time to begin to understand why. And it took finding my way rather miraculously back to the place from which they emigrated, which was a quite strange village, high in the lower Carpathian Mountains in southeastern Poland. So this poem I began in 1994, but I wasn't able to finish for about 25 years because I didn't know enough yet. And this is for my great aunt. We called our great aunts Teta. It's a word from a language that's maybe a dialect, maybe a language of its own called Lemko. Teta, for my great aunt. Teta, it's winter in Pittsburgh again. Dark brick city of smokestacks and soot. And we're walking up Broadway Avenue past billboards and vacant lots through the slush of snow and cinders as the streetcars slur past, ghosts, and our flowered babushkas and shabby coats, shopping bags weighing down our arms. We've bought cans of beets, heads of cabbage, meat ground fresh that will squeeze into fists. And we don't flinch when the crew-cut kids hiss DPs at our backs. We're not ashamed anymore, at last, to have come from nowhere, nothing, dirt. The village you fled as a young girl, gone. The houses burned and the fields you worked into rows of green, grown wild again. Once you spooned honey into my mouth because my arms and legs were like sticks, because I itched and wept and wanted more than sweetness, to know who I was. But you sighed. No one wants to remember that stuff. How you came to this new country stinking of shit. How you sold bootleg hooch for cash, your own smooth flesh for a rich man's song. The rich growing fat on the fat of the land, while you buried one child in a pauper's grave, raised 2 others on blood money, prayer. All your sins in a basket too heavy to lift. And your body already a heap of grief the day you slipped in the alley and fell in that garden you made of ground gone, ash under a slick of tin-washed sky. And then you never stood up again. I watched as you shrank in your narrow bed, blind, but you gripped my hand and sang the old song of the little bird in a tongue I still don't understand. Dark syllables fluttering just out of reach until you were shadow, whisper, less. Your whole life a ragged story stitched into breath, unstitched again. Teta, we've never been much in this world, although we were many, too many once. Children who circled your table, blowing out candles, eyes tilted like yours. Our faces, the same face all over again, the face of the stranger wherever we turned. My cousin, the Cossack, the Gypsy, the Jew, my cousin, the dark Slav, my cousin, the slave. And we'll never belong to this place where you came with your one suitcase tied with rope, with your shape like a shadow risen from earth, some mute root pulled from a meadow where wild flowers blazed in the summer and winter lay down. This is America, Tata. You're dead, and our dying means nothing here. Give me your bags. This is another poem from that collection, and it's called Earth. We've traveled like this all our lives, all our life as a people on the earth. We've gathered and scattered and gathered again in rooms made of firelight or of song. We've buried our dead when we could in places they loved or the bones of them. Every step a turn of the wheel, a word set down and no other word. Every turn of the wheel, a prayer in mud, the answer of one God. Sometimes we veiled ourselves, and sometimes we stood, clothed only in sunlight and wind, sugar of flowers on our breath, honey of bird call in our mouths. Once I'd forgotten the way to the well, and the smell of cool rain led me there. Once I was only a child in my sleep. Then I awoke and was everywhere. When I was a teenager, my family moved from Pittsburgh to rural Kentucky. And these were my parents' happiest years, especially my father's. We had 6 wild acres. We lived in a house that we built ourselves. We moved into it when it was still a shell, and then we constructed it around ourselves. And we were able to have any kind of animal we wanted, wild and domesticated animals, some outside, some in the house. We had horses, but we didn't have the money for saddles. And so you had a bridle made of rope, and you learned to ride bareback. And again, this is a true story. And I like to say that my mother could have written something wilder and more imaginative than this. There was a night when somebody constructing near us set a pile of scrap lumber on fire and then left, and the fire started to spread. And so my sister and I, then teenagers, and 2 local boys borrowed horses and rode 2 and 2 on these horses around the woods all night, supposedly to make sure that the fire didn't spread. But, and of course I couldn't go to school the next day because I'd been up all night horseback riding through the woods. And so my mother wrote the most wonderful excuse for me to take to the principal. It was brilliant. But I've lost it. I lost it, so I had to write the poem instead. And this is a pantoum. Maybe some of you know a pantoum is a particular poetic form that originated in Malaysian fishing songs. So it's a little bit like call and response, I think. So every line occurs twice, but when it reoccurs, it occurs in a slightly different context. And the hope is that the poem keeps moving forward. So you'll hear a lot of repeated lines, and the first line becomes the last line. And one of the poems I really loved as a young woman, probably no surprise to anyone who knows me, was The Highwayman. The highwayman came riding, just dark and romantic and lyrical. And so I have to say that surely influenced this. So it's called Bareback Pantoum. One night, bareback and young, we rode through the woods, and the woods were on fire. 2 borrowed horses, 2 local boys whose waists we clung to, my sister and I, and the woods were on fire. The pounding of hooves, the smell of smoke, and the sharp sweat of boys whose waists we clung to, my sister and I, as we rode toward flame with the sky in our mouths. The pounding of hooves, the smell of smoke, and the sharp sweat of boys, and the heart saying, mine, as we rode toward flame with the sky in our mouths, the trees turning gold, then crimson, white, and the heart saying, mine, of the wild, bright world. The trees turning gold, then crimson white as they burned in the darkness, and we were girls of the wild, bright world, of the woods near our house. We could turn, see the lights as they burned in the darkness, and we were girls, so we rode just to ride through the woods near our house. We could turn, see the lights, and the horses would carry us home. So we rode just to ride, my sister and I, just to be close to that danger, desire. And the horses would carry us home. 2 borrowed horses, 2 local boys, my sister and I, just to be close to that danger, desire. One night, bareback and young, we rode through the woods. I'd like to read a poem from this new edition of Sigan, the Gypsy poem, which is a book-length poem and a kind of documentary in a way. It intersperses lyrical poems about my travels, kind of in search for my family's connection to this heritage of the Gypsy, the Roma. That's interspersed with a timeline of what has happened to the Roma people all over the world throughout time. And the poem itself, writing the poem, had this strange effect I never expected it to have of putting me into the world of the Roma in a really life-changing way. So in 2017, I was invited to the commemoration of the Roma Holocaust, the Pogromos at Auschwitz. And one of the people I met there was a man named Raymond Goren, who was a French gypsy, Tsigan. At the time, he was about 90. The time I met him, he was 94, 95. I remember the first time I laid eyes on him. He was this tiny little wizened man with a jaunty fedora on his head. And he had a mug of beer that looked like it weighed more than he did, and was smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. And he was surrounded by young Roma who were hanging on his every word. He had survived 7 different camps and prisons. He had been an acrobat in the Gypsy circus, family circus, as a boy. So he was able to just escape from anything, any kind of way he was captured. So he survived all of that, had a wonderful sense of humor, and was just adored in the Roma community. And he died last week. So I want to read this poem for Raymond. And he was telling us, we were at Auschwitz, and this was in 2017, we were sitting on the ground outside the gate of Auschwitz under a tree. And he was telling us stories, and he had given an interview in 2015 where he talked about escaping and climbing a tree and just watching from the tree the whole night as the police were looking for him. And he says, I was hiding in a tree the whole night while the police were looking for me. Raymond Goren. He doesn't say they tried to kill him, but they had. A face like smoke, a wraith, a man who was a boy who disappeared, escaped again. Now he sits beneath a tree outside the gates of the concentration camp and lights a cigarette. He was an acrobat, he says to me in French, and still so slight, so lithe, you see. He locks his hands behind his back and shows me how he bent in two, stepping through those shackles, slipped away. Gave them the slip 9 different times, was only caught 8 times, brought back. He's 93 years old and smokes a cigarette beneath the tree in Auschwitz, says, you see? Against the monsters of the world, this little man, his black hat cocked. Once the plump guards laughed, made merry, while the likes of this man starved. Now we pass some sandwiches around. What isn't over has begun again. We're hungry, but there's more. The grass grows lush with human ash. There are no birds. No, there's one bird. If it's okay, Harry, I'll read one more short poem to finish.
Absolutely.
And this is also from Earth, and it is a villanelle, which is another received form in poetry that uses repeating lines and a rhyme pattern. And to me, a villanelle, because it's written in tercets in 3-line stanzas and then a 4-line stanza at the end. Something about the way it moves has always reminded me of a waltz. So this is for my parents. I'll close with them with a dance. And my mother's name in real life, my mother's name was Laverne Pearl Vishnevsky, which she thought was ridiculous. She claimed that some drunken uncle dreamed up, Laverne Pearl because he thought it sounded French. And the funny thing that happened was after my mother passed away, she died my parents were 7 years apart in age, and my mother died 7 years after my father. And after she died, her middle name, she became Pearl. I have no idea why. Harry and Pearl, a villanelle. My father wears shoes in the afterworld, the shiny brown dress shoes we buried him in. My mother goes barefoot and answers to Pearl, though that wasn't her name. Daddy called her girl and told us, your mother works hard, be good kids. Now Daddy wears shoes in the afterworld. Because he lay shoeless his last years, lay curled like a child in his bed, crying out, where he'd sing, and our mother went barefoot and answered him. Pearl was her middle name, given her slurred at birth, a drunken granduncle's grandiose gift. But our father wears shoes in the afterworld, and our mother, who followed him, ever his jewel, to wherever they've gone, in her last white dress, goes barefoot beside him now, answers to Pearl, won't answer to mother, and won't be implored. She cooked and she cleaned and she sang, that's enough. Now my father wears shoes in the afterworld, shiny brown dress shoes, and gives her a twirl in his arms. She says, girl again, laughs, my mother, who's barefoot, and answers to Pearl when I call to her. Call to my sweet disappeared mother and father who slip through my breath. My father wears shoes in the afterworld. My mother goes barefoot and answers to Pearl.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What a wonderful reading. That was great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
What a beautiful reading.
What a beautiful, both of you. Great art, as engaging as this is and outstanding, it has a way of breaking down our defenses and allowing our vulnerabilities to come to the forefront and make us feel even deeper. And one of the reasons I go to poetry, reading and writing, as I do for just about every day since 1966, is to live more fully. Some people have their reasons other than that, but that's why I go there. And thank you for taking us home, both of you, to your homes. It reminded me, at this time we've all suffered personal deaths, and then the large number of deaths in the world today. It reminded me of 2 lines in Anna Akhmatova's poem, Death of a Poet, that I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, all the flowers in the known world came to meet the poet at his death. And you two poets have just really brought all the blooming flowers to all of us, and it's really moved me deeply. So thank you very much, and thank you for those of you watching. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Carol.
Ditto to everyone. Thanks to all.
Thank you.
Really, really had a good time. Beautiful Cecilia. Thanks, Harry.
I hope to have you guys back on Organized Chaos in the future. Thank you.
I love that title. Thank
It
you.
doesn't seem very chaotic to me, but what do I know?